The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinepodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click Support Us at ItalianWinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille.
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast Book Club. Each month we select a great wine book to share. We chat to the author and get your opinions. Stay tuned as we read Between the Vines with the Italian Wine Podcast. Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. This is the 5th episode of a new show focusing on the world of wine writing. Each month we choose a book, chat to the author, listen to some extracts and explore the story behind the book. This month, our guest is slightly different because she is a publisher rather than a writer. It's a real pleasure to welcome Hermione Ireland, the Managing Director of Académie du Vin Library, specialist publishing house behind some of the best wine writing, past and present. Welcome, Hermione. How are you?
I'm very well, Richard. Thank you for inviting me on the show. It's lovely to be here.
Great. Now, you have extensive experience in the world of publishing, working for some of the biggest and most influential publishing houses in the UK and beyond. But before speaking about your work as a publisher, I'd like to explore what first drew you to the world of books, the world of publishing. And I understand that, like some of our previous guests, you studied English literature at university. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
They still say when you're looking at applying to university now, and I have a post-university child and one who's there, choose something that you love because you will do best in it. And I was passionate about reading. English literature was an obvious thing. I mean, I'm older than you, Richard, but we were very lucky back in the day. We didn't have to work that hard at university. But just going and spending 3 years, reading books and talking about them in a seminar was sort of a dream come true. But I think it does set you up well for a job in publishing. There are quite a lot of people in publishing have done other degrees like history and classics. I think it's really important for most people, if you're going to be an editor or a marketing or PR person particularly, to have done an essay subject. But I think English, studying literature, just makes you very, very author-centric. It makes you very focused on the writing itself. But it also makes you, I think, concentrate on the reader because you've been a reader. Anybody who works in publishing is a reader. You continue to be that person. So I think at the end of the day, if you're in publishing, the reader is the most important part of the whole ecosystem. Therefore, studying English as a degree is a great preparation for that, I would say.
Okay, yeah, great. And I completely agree with the advice that you should choose something you love. I studied history at university, and that was basically the rationale. It was the subject I was most interested in. And I think, in fact, the skills that I learned at university, I don't know if this is the same for you, Hermione, but I use them every day in terms of research, in terms of preparing an argument, in terms of bringing together different sources and trying to come to an evidence-based conclusion.
Yes, I think that's true. I think for me, a lot of it was quick thinking. It was being in seminars and needing to, as you say, put an argument together, but, be able to talk coherently and confidently in front of other people about ideas you had. I think that was probably one of the most important skills, as well as what you said about research and thinking and writing well. I think that was another important bit for me.
Yeah. So you moved more or less from university, from English literature into the world of publishing, and you spent a significant part of your career with Dorling Kindersley Limited, the British multinational publishing company that specialises in illustrated reference books for adults and children. I think many of our listeners will be familiar with some of those books. I certainly recognise the Super Readers and the Eyewitness books, and even the Star Wars and Marvel.
Yeah, it was a great place to work. I mean, Peter Kindersley was definitely a visionary within the publishing industry. He very much believed, I think he may have been dyslexic, and he very much believed that a picture tells 1,000 words. So he came up with this design that he called lexicographics, or this concept, I should say, of highly illustrated books that got an awful lot of information across. And they were originally, it was particularly in the children's list, that was true, but the Eyewitness travel guides have, been world bestsellers for I should know, I think they were started in the mid-90s, I think 97 or 98. It was a wonderful place to work. I went into publishing because, if you love the written work, then what else would you do almost? I thought about being a journalist, but it was very, very competitive. And some of my family already worked in publishing, and it was something I knew. DK, as we came to call it, because nobody could ever pronounce it. People were always calling the switchboard and asking for Doreen Kingsley and stuff like that. We focused a lot on niche audiences and communities. And that was particularly true in the 2000s. When I first went there in 97, I think that was perhaps a little bit less the case. And the brand was very important to my role as the marketing and publicity director. Most publishers' brands are not a very important part of the transaction, the interaction with consumers. You're buying an author brand rather than a publisher brand, which is as it should be.
Yeah.
But that wasn't true for DK, because we believe that if you liked a DK book, then you would like that approach to lots of different subjects, or possibly to several other books in the same subject, whether that was gardening or parenting or children's books on dinosaurs. So we were very focused on building a community of DK brand lovers, but then also working with, communities of gardeners, or, we had some wine books and cooks, or people interested in natural history. From a marketing perspective, it was a very interesting place to work. There was a lot of, sort of meat on the bone, as it were, of going into work every day.
Yeah, a very interesting period also to be working in publishing. I imagine one of the things that struck me reading about your career in publishing was that it straddles the advent of the internet age. You're involved in the publication of these eyewitness travel guides. Also, I think your career involved the Rough Guide series of pocket guidebooks.
Yes.
And I remember backpacking in Eastern Europe and South America with my indispensable copy of the Rough Guide in my back pocket. But I wonder now, with Google Maps and social media and the internet, how did that impact the publishing industry, and how did you personally and the industry more generally transition from traditional publishing to digital marketing, digital publishing and e-commerce?
Well, it's an interesting question, and there's quite a lot of different elements to it. So I'm going to pick them apart. I think in terms of content and whether or not people are buying them in book format versus just on the internet these days, the industry is in remarkably good shape. Book lovers still love books. We had the advent of ebooks, which everyone was concerned would kill print, and it didn't. It stabilized. It's a great format. There's no paper involved. It's cheaper. It's highly portable. It's very good for people who read large amounts of particularly genre fiction, whether that's crime or romance, that sort of thing. And they don't want to spend more than £1 a book. Not great for authors, but no. So I think travel guides, to your point about mentioning eyewitness and rough guides, I think travel guides have been hit probably one of the hardest sectors of the industry, because a lot of people do want that content to be bang up to date and on their phones. On the other hand, when you're traveling around the world, you don't necessarily have access to data all over the place, and a book is still a very good thing. I take a travel guide with me wherever I go, and actually we'll come on to it later, but we're going to be publishing some wine travel guides this autumn, which I'm very excited about. DK, and I was also at Phaidon for a few years, they were some of the innovators when it came to publishers' websites. DK was selling books. It had e-commerce literally from the beginning, before 2000. So early. And it meant that DK had an amazing database of email subscribers. Phaidon had one, but they weren't really using it when I was there back in those days. So we were, I was at the, I would say, cutting edge of email marketing, community marketing. And one of the things, content, as we all know, is a really important part of the web, but particularly brand engagement. And we were in there right at the beginning. So I was lucky to be at the right place, somewhere that was innovative and wanted to do new things. A lot of the publishers would do e-commerce on their websites because they were scared of upsetting the retailers. DK didn't really care. And I think, just being able to trial things all the time, marketing is always about experimentation and iteration. And if you've got small budgets, which even big publishers tend to have, you can do quite a lot of different things with not much money in digital marketing. So yeah, we did some brilliant things. I'm very proud and grateful for the things I was able to do particularly in the 2000s at DK.
Yeah, very interesting. That whole marketing conversation is one that probably for another podcast.
Yes.
But I was particularly interested in what you said about the travel guides and also about the wine guides you have in production.
Yes.
But I wonder if we might see a bounce back in terms of the availability and the popularity of these pocket guides, because I was in Rome recently with my kids and we were basically using Google Maps to navigate and the internet as a guide, but it was a entirely unsatisfactory experience, I have to say.
Well,
and I kind of craved that little pocketbook in my back pocket, just with a little map, just to help me find the nooks and the crannies and get some inside information.
Well, I mean, Jancis Robinson said the other day that, you know, the word curate is massively overused in the wine world. She was particularly talking about back label and copy and PR's copy. But I think it's a perfectly legitimate word to use when you're talking about travel guides, that somebody has curated the information you need, whether it's for a short weekend, you know, city break, or it's for a longer time spent in the country. And so shall I tell you about those books now? It might be a good segue.
Yeah.
It's a new series, as I said, and we're starting with Bordeaux and Rioja this September. And then next spring, we're going to do Tuscany and Napa. And then we're basically going to cover as many of the main wine regions or, you know, cities or smaller countries as we can, sort of in pairs every 6 months. They're affordable, but sort of aspirational. They're £12.99, maybe €13.99. Pocket size, beautifully illustrated. They will cover the same sort of format as a normal travel guide, and they will sit, most importantly, in the travel parts of the bookshop. So they're going to have some geography and some history, but they will also have the wine aspect. So they will tell you about the grapes of the region and what the winemaking processes typically are. And then there'll be a gazetteer, sort of about a third of the book is a gazetteer of, you know, great places to eat with great wine lists, bodegas or chateaux where you can stay or where you can eat, wine shops you can go to, and then it'll have sort of the best vintages for the region as well. So, you know, very much appealing to somebody who's either a keen wine person or is wine curious, but, you know, they are going to Bordeaux, and even if they're going just partly to visit the region, you know, they want to get some wine experiences in as part of their itinerary. So yeah, we're very excited about them.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. I can really see them taking off in a big way. Again, when I traveled to Rome, what I was looking for is a kind of authentic experience, a bunch of information about the wine, about the food, and the internet. You know, the internet, of course, is great, but it's not, as you say, curated. The volume of information and the quality of the information isn't always great. So if you've got a little pocket guide that gives you some really good quality, insightful, expert information, then yeah, I'm definitely in the market for that kind of thing.
Excellent. Good. Well, you're definitely my target market.
Yeah, and I think the price point sounds just about right as well for my limited book budget.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Hermione, that you were also a visiting lecturer, and I know that you're also a trustee of World Reader. Before we go on to talk a bit more about the world of wine, can you tell us a bit more about this aspect of your work?
Yes. You know, I've come to teaching quite late, as I think quite a lot of people do when they take their industry knowledge and go into usually universities. I think it's lovely to be able to give back. I think it's a good skill to acquire. You know, you have to teach yourself to be a teacher, or you get some support. I think it's really important for students who are on vocational courses, either bachelors in publishing or masters more often, to have people from the industry come in and talk about what they do. World Reader, I'm passionate about literacy. So World Reader is a digital literacy charity working in primarily sub-Saharan Africa. I'm just a volunteer, but I'm very passionate about that.
Absolutely. And is that based around electronic readers?
Yes.
How many is that about getting devices into kids' hands so they can then access these libraries of?
Absolutely, that's exactly what it is. But these days, it's all based around phones, because parents at least all have phones. So it's about there's an awful lot of community engagement with carers and parents, encouraging them to understand how important it is to read to and with their children. So yes, it's entirely digital.
Excellent. I'm thinking of my own kids, who are 2 boys, a teenager and a 10-year-old, and I haven't really introduced them to e-reading. One of them is quite a good reader, the other a bit less so, but I wonder whether e-reading and reading on your phone is a way to get them more engaged, because I know from personal experience that they're more likely to engage with something if it's on a device than they are if it's in a crusty old book.
I mean, the other thing you could look at is graphic novels. That's a great way of getting slightly more reluctant readers, particularly boys, into reading. But you could do that digitally as well. I would do that on an iPad rather than an ebook reader, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Again, probably a wider topic that we could spend all day talking about. But this is the Italian Wine Podcast, so I wanted to shift the focus towards the world of wine and your relationship with wine and Italian wine in particular. So is wine something that you've always had an interest in?
Well, I've always loved wine. My father has always had a good cellar, not an insanely good cellar because he wasn't that wealthy, but he's always given us nice wine and we've always talked about it. So I've always had an interest, but not a knowledge, I would say. When I was at DK, we published Tom Stevenson's books and Robert Joseph's books, and we actually did with a UK distributor for Robert Parker's books. So I was a bit involved in wine publishing, but this job basically came out of the blue. I was at Hachette. I was at HarperCollins at that point on a maternity cover, and I was called about it. And the idea of running, I'd always worked, as you said, for the really big publishers. I'd never worked for a small operation. But they called me about it and said, would you be interested in having a conversation to run this small wine book publisher? And they were interested in me because of my nonfiction and my, niche sales and marketing and community experiences at DK, even though it was for a much bigger company. And I already really liked wine. So I thought, this sounds almost too good to be true. It wasn't too good to be true. It's hard work, but I love it. So I joined Simon McMurtry, who was the chairman of one of the founders. He hired me. He's the president of the board of trustees of the WSET at the moment. And I can't remember if he suggested it or if I did, but I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I have to do my WSET levels. So I did 2 in lockdown. I did 3 at the school in London in 22, I think. Right. And that made a massive difference to me because, I was going to trade tastings all the time, but it meant I could go in with some knowledge and understanding of what we were doing. It made me feel much more comfortable talking to all the amazing writers, but even some of the wine producers that we deal with. And I'm definitely haven't stopped what I want, in terms of my ambitions to do more. And I would now say, Richard, that I feel like I'm more than 50% in the world of wine rather than in the world of books. I feel like, more than half of my professional job is in wine. And that's because we are a niche publisher, we are part of the wine industry. From a book perspective, we do things differently than a lot of people anyway. We didn't even start selling into bookshops when the company went live. We've added that as a channel more recently, but initially it was all about building a customer database and selling directly, and that's still a huge part of our business. So being in the wine world is really important to me.
Yeah, good. And we'll come on in a moment to talk about specifically the books that the Académie du Vin is involved in. But what about your relationship with Italian wine? Hermione, do you have a particular favourite wine or wine region or even a wine experience that draws you towards Italy in particular?
Yeah, I've always absolutely adored Italy and been on really quite a lot of holidays. Didn't know a lot about Italian wine when I was younger, to be honest. So I think I've really got much more into Italian wine in the last few years since I've been doing this job. Obviously, coming out to visit you in Verona at Wine to Wine and at the 5-Star Awards has been a really great learning experience. I'm trying to train myself in Barolo. I go to some of the tastings in London. I think it's wonderful, but a little bit difficult. I'm a real fan of wines from Collio and the North. Went to a wonderful tasting of Cantina Tramina. Big fan of the cool Northern Whites. Mm-hmm. I love Franciacorta. It's up there as one of my top 2 sparkling wines. The other one obviously being the French one. I don't know how I used to feel about Chianti. Chianti Classico is becoming one of my top 5 favorite red wines. And I've had some amazing Cabernet Francs from the coast, from the Maremma region recently. I'm kind of beginning to really focus on Cabernet Francs from the Loire as well, but I thought the Italian ones were really interesting. So Primitivo. Primitivo is slightly one of my guilty pleasures because I feel like I love the kind of rich, warm, almost sweetness of it. But I worry that I can't say that to some people. It's not like you'll hear Cabernet Sauvignon from the left bank after all.
Well, don't worry, I won't get started on my guilty pleasures when it comes to the world of wine. Otherwise, I think I would probably not have much of a future in the industry. But I noticed you didn't, that list of favourite Italian wines, mention Amarone, but I know your first reading is from Amarone and the Fine Wines of Verona by Michael Garner.
Absolutely. So we, Académie du Vin Library, had long admired, but also, felt a competitive sort of envy and jealousy of our main competitors, the Classic Wine Library, which were published by Richard Burton until the end of last year. And we had always said to Richard, we would be very, very interested in buying your list when it came up for sale at the end of the year. We had to bid for it. I was just desperate that nobody else had it. It's the most wonderful series covering, at the moment, a large number of regions. There's still quite a lot out there, luckily, for us to write new books on. We haven't done enough Italian wine books. We want to publish quite a few more in the Classic Wine Library series. We've just done, I think you're talking to David Way, who's written The Wines of Piemonte, and that was just published before Christmas. Michael Garner's book, Amarone and the Fine Wines of Verona, is a little bit older, but it's a really, really important wine region. So much wonderful stuff going on there. So I thought that would be a good book to read a few paragraphs from.
Yeah.
So this is from the introductions. I would have no hesitation over my selection of desert island wines. Providing, of course, that I was allowed one white and one red for the duration of my stay, I would choose Verona's best-known wine couple, Sauve and Valpolicella. To be more precise, that would most likely be an example from the Classico or the geographical heartland of each denomination, from a good recent vintage and from one of the many small to medium-sized growers who have in recent years taken overall standards of quality to an entirely new level. An unconventional choice, perhaps, for someone who has spent most of his working life in the wine trade and has been lucky enough to taste fine wines from all over the globe. But my selection has nothing to do with the bargain basement wines that the two denominations were once associated with. Such wines, bought and sold on price alone, may unfortunately still be found, but it is a schoolboy howler to assume that they continue to be truly representative. The iconic Piedmontese producer of Barolo and Barbaresco, Angelo Gaia, once expressed the view that the average consumer perceives a wine-producing area in the form of a pyramid. Taking Bordeaux as his example, Angelo argued that the lesser wines bask in the reflected glory of those at the apex. In other words, the consumer has positive expectations of the humble AC Bordeaux wines at the base simply through their association with Chateau Margaux and the other first growths at the top. The problem for many Italian wines has long been that the consumer's perception is reversed, and the least interesting examples of the denomination are seen as prototypical. Expectations of quality for the wines higher up the scale are correspondingly low as a consequence. The Sauve and Valpolicella I'm referring to are made by producers who, tapping into an intimate knowledge of their vineyards and local traditions, have all but closed that dog-eared page in history by following the production process from bud through to bottle and attempting to make the best possible wines from their own lovingly nurtured grapes. While the beauty of Sauve and Valpolicella can be found to a large degree in their deceptive simplicity, their true value, as largely inexpensive wines, lies with their enviable versatility. They are the ne plus ultra of everyday wine, so my desert island choice is a highly pragmatic one. To worry the conceit a little further, my diet would no doubt be based on fish cooked over wood embers and accompanied hopefully by a few foraged vegetables and leaves. I really would be hard put to find a wine more ideally suited to such honest, nourishing and tasty food than Sauve. There would be little or no meat, but if I was really fortunate, a wild pig might occasionally be on the menu, and maybe even some wild fowl every now and then. I'm in luck once more. Valpolicella is already one of my favourite wines to go with pork-based dishes, and works superbly with feathered game too. Chilled down in a cool stream, it would also make an interesting and worthwhile alternative to go with fish. Furthermore, as both wines are generally fresh, light, and well-balanced, they could easily serve as an early evening aperitif when many other still wines are in reality not particularly refreshing. The reason my two choices would work so well is quite simply that they have been selected on the basis that they not only perform the fundamental role of accompanying food to perfection, but are an absolute pleasure to drink.
Very good. I would definitely have a bottle or in fact a case of Amarone on my desert island with me. Certainly make life a little more pleasant.
Definitely. I don't know how I would choose the wine to have on the desert island. That would, I couldn't begin to think how I would make that choice.
Well, I think Michael Garner has made a decent stab at it there in that introduction.
Very, very persuasive. I agree.
Are you enjoying this podcast? There is so much more high-quality wine content available from Mama Jumbo Shrimp. Check out our new wine study maps or books on Italian wine, including Italian Wine Unplugged, and much, much more. Just visit our website, mamajumboshrimp.com. Now, back to the show.
Turning to the work of the Académie du Vin library, and in particular the role of Stephen Spurrier in establishing the library, for our listeners who don't know who he was, what can you tell us about him and his contribution to wine and wine writing?
He was an amazing man, and I think his legacy, he gave so much to so many people, and at the heart of Stephen as a man was just this generous and inquisitive, curious soul. Very upper middle class, came from plenty of money. He wanted to work in wine. He didn't have to go and get a job earning lots of money. He had a degree in, I think, economics from London School of Economics. He could have gone into banking, but he wanted to work in wine, and he apprenticed himself to some of the London wine merchants. And having got a couple of years of that under his belt, a few years, he got married, and then he and Bella set off for France, and they spent a year living in Provence, where he was doing all sorts of things. And then they ended up in Paris, and that was really where his professional story started. He bought a small wine shop from an old lady who'd been running it for a long time, but he spent 6 months working underneath her before she finally retired and left. And then he set up a wine school upstairs. So he was interested in finding interesting wines from all over France, very much not just Bordeaux and Burgundy, although he went and visited producers there and in the Rhone and knew lots of people. But he was teaching particularly expats, a lot of Americans and Brits who were living in Paris. And his ethos about wine education was learning through tasting and tasting the best wines you could. So he had this wonderful reputation as being this place you could go and just meet interesting people, but taste fantastic wines. And obviously this was the 70s, and that was obviously much more affordable, sadly, than it is these days. The event that really catapulted his name into the stratosphere, but also had this enormous lasting effect. In 1976, he and his American colleague, Patricia Gallagher, wanted to put on something to celebrate the American bicentenary. And as you know, the Americans and the French have a very close relationship, mostly through fighting us lot. Yeah. And they wanted to show some amazing Californian wines and let the French know that there was some real quality coming out of the West Coast. Patricia's idea originally, and then they went over to California and they selected some wines. So they arranged for some of the key French wine critics of the day, some journalists, some chefs, some other writers, I think at least one winemaker potentially, to come and do this blind tasting of these Californian wines. And 2 days before the event, Stephen said, well, why don't we make it a bit more interesting and compare them with, their opposite numbers? So they were bringing over, obviously in those days, Chardonnays and Cabernet Sauvignons. So the whites were going to be tasted against Burgundy, reds against Bordeaux. And there were some first growths, there were some absolutely huge names coming in from France. So they did this tasting. The white wines were tasted, and Stephen was marking them. They hadn't got to the red wines yet, and he couldn't believe it because the Americans were winning. Because they were running quite late, he made the decision to tell the judges that the American wines had won, which was an interesting decision because they were then able to adjust their markings. And it was, I think, with the reds, they were able to identify more easily some of the French wines. But again, because of how markings work in a blind wine tasting, the Americans won again, and the French were absolutely apoplectic. Stephen was persona non grata for some time in France. I mean, in California, he's almost a saint. He's an absolute hero, as he should be. He has an American Medal of Congress. But he carried on doing that sort of thing for lots of other wine regions, and he was just extraordinarily curious. He was very supportive of the nascent Indian industry. He was a huge fan of Uruguayan wine. He traveled everywhere. He did a lot in Asia, educating people. When he died in 22, the number of young people who posted on social media about how he had, taken time to talk to them. He was never too proud or busy or, too high and mighty. He was happy to talk to everybody. He had his own vineyard, which actually I was driving past at the weekend in Dorset, making some very high quality English sparkling and English still wines, Bride Valley. Basically came up with the Decanter Fine Wine Awards. He never rested on his laurels. He was restless and creative, didn't make a huge amount of money in his life, but that wasn't the most important thing. Yeah, he was a visionary, and I'm very lucky to have been able to work with him for 6 months when I joined the Academy, and before he died. I was very grateful to have had a time to work with him and meet him, and we miss him.
Yeah, very compelling character and extremely influential as well, as you say. I read recently the book by George Tabor,
yes,
who was the Times journalist, the only journalist present at that 1976 tasting. And his account of that tasting, it's a really, really interesting, well-written book that goes into the background behind it, talks about, obviously, Stephen's role, but much more than that, it goes into the emergence of the Californian wine scene and the reaction and the impact. Okay, so your next reading is from Stephen Spurrier himself. This comes from his memoirs.
Yes, it's called A Life in Wine. Talking a bit about from a chapter called Here, There and Everywhere, which is set in Paris after the judgment of Paris. In 1979, Goat and Milo held a 2-day blind tasting on the theme Les Olympiades du Vin, the Wine Olympics. The Academy was involved in sourcing the bottles to get the widest spread possible, and then helped to arrange the flights in which they would be tasted. They were grouped by grape varieties and price band. International tasters were invited, including fellow masters of wine Michael Broadbent, David Peppercorn, and Serena Sutcliffe from the UK. The first morning, I was on a table with Jacques Cazes of Domaine Dujac in front of a range of Chardonnays. Michael was on a nearby table with the ebullient Jacques Manière, chef cuisinier of Le Pactole on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, who served his house champagne from Le Gras in Chouy en carafe. I love this idea, not only because the decanting reduces the bubbles a fraction, but also because the simple carafe was so much more relaxed than a champagne bottle. At the mid-morning break, Michael came over quite agitated to say that Manière wasn't spitting anything out, which unnerved him, and could I please intervene? Before the next group of wine was served, I said hello to Jacques, who knew me well from his restaurant, and said that Monsieur Broadbent was concerned and that perhaps the spittoon might be useful. His reply was clear. Écoute, mon petit, si je crache, je perds mon équilibre. Listen, my boy, if I spit, I lose my balance. His place was empty for the afternoon session. That evening, I introduced the UK tasters to Alain de Tournier's superb restaurant, Aux Trois Gascons, in the 12th arrondissement, a marvellous place for the best food and wine from Alain's native southwest France. No doubt there were many surprises from these tastings, but one upset made the headlines. The Torres Black Label Cabernet Sauvignon from Penedès in northern Spain was placed first in its group ahead of First Growth, Haut-Brion and Latour. It was not long before the tasters on that panel, including me, received a single line from Jean-Paul Garder, the manager of Latour, asking, "Vous n'étiez pas victime d'embuscade? You haven't been conned, have you?" No, and Miguel Torres didn't think so either. The Black Label went on to justify the award year after year.
Great, very interesting. It gives us a flavour of Stephen's writing and an insight into kind of activities, but also the humour that he brings.
It's just lovely, isn't it? Yeah.
Is that available on the Académie du Vin library?
We've done a couple of books like this. That was an example of Stephen had written the book about a year and a half before our edition came out, and it had been badly published. It had been badly edited. There were lots of typos in it. And it was then out of print. It had been published by a division of Penguin, actually. And Stephen was obviously our sort of godfather, and we wanted to do a new edition. And it was just when he found out he was ill. So it was a labour of love and speed to basically knit the book back together to make it better edited. And so we published it in November 21, and he passed away the following March. But yes, it's available as an ebook and an audiobook as well as a print book. So I would highly recommend it. It's a really great read about an amazing person.
Yeah, and a lasting legacy to someone who's been so influential in the world of wine. You've told us about Stephen Spurrier and his role as an early wine influencer, I suppose you could say. Talking about the Académie du Vin library, what kind of books do you publish?
The library came into being as a result of a conversation over lunch between Stephen and Hugh Johnson, who we went to school with, and they were talking about the great wine books of the past and what a shame it wasn't that they weren't in print anymore. So they said, well, let's do something about it. And they got in touch with Simon McMurtry, who I mentioned before, who is both a wine man and a publishing man. He ran Mitchell Beasley in his mid-20s and published, obviously, Hough and Jancis's World Atlas of Wine, as well as the Pocket Wine Guide. So the original idea was to publish some classics and some new books. The first 4 books included Fiona Morrison's 10 Great Wine Families, which she had originally actually written in Flemish and had published in Flemish, and then she translated her book. Ben's book on sherry, a beautiful anthology called In Vino Veritas, which is very much the work of my brilliant colleague Susan Keevil, who's our editorial director, which was a collection of lots of different people's wine writing, and Michael Broadbent's wine tasting. So they did a commemorative edition to celebrate, and it was published before, I think, around the time of his 92nd birthday. But increasingly, we have been publishing new books rather than republishing classics, I would say. We focus on stories. We want to give readers, wine lovers, the stories of the people who make wines and the amazing regions where they're made. So we've published the Jean-Michel Cazes from Chateau Lynch Barge. We've done an anthology of Andrew Jefford's writing, which, okay, the articles had been published before, but never in book format. I'm going to read an article from Drinking with the Valkyries shortly. We do have these wonderful anthologies that Susan puts together. We're doing on Tuscany this autumn, which I'm very excited about. We've done 4 already. So California, Burgundy, Champagne and Bordeaux, not in that order. About half of the articles and essays in that are newly commissioned, and the other half have appeared in print, sometimes a long time ago. Evelyn Waugh has got into both Burgundy and Champagne, and some of them very recently. We're not reference book publishers on the Academy side. It's very much wine literature that will enhance your enjoyment of wine, of the wines that you drink. That's our mission. But having bought the Classic Wine Library, we can now extend the types of books we publish to books that are slightly more reference-based. So if you're a WSET level 3, particularly if you're a diploma student, if you're an MW student, if you're a sommelier student, they are fantastic books. If you want to do a deep dive into a region, you really need a Classic Wine Library book because it will tell you everything you need to know about the region. And they're all written by wonderful experts, quite a lot of MWs amongst them. And obviously the new travel guides I mentioned we're working on commissioning a book on sustainability for next year, which I think is a really important book that we need to publish. We will never publish the World Atlas of Wine, partly because Mitchell Beasley wouldn't ever sell it. And we won't ever publish the Pocket Wine Guide. But, I think we'd like to think that most other wine books out there are books we would consider. There aren't very many of us. We can't publish too many in a year because it costs too much. And there's only so many books that wine-loving readers want anyway. So it's always an interesting commercial decision you have to make about every book you decide to put on the list.
What about unpublished writers, Hermione? Do you accept pitches from unpublished writers? And what advice would you give to aspiring wine writers?
So I'm very happy for people to send me pitches, submissions. I do get a number every year. We haven't taken many books that we haven't come up with ourselves, but we are publishing. There's a new series on the Bordeaux, the top appellations, the AOCs, that we're going to do in partnership with the Wine Education Council over the next few years. I think the difficulty with a lot of books that people come to us with is that they may be great books, but they're not always very commercial. So I think if you're pitching a publisher, you have to have a very strong sense of who the audience is and why this book is a book that they need. Because when you're selling and marketing a book, you have to persuade the said audience that they do need this book. It's going to, make a difference to their lives. I think if you're an aspiring writer, you need 2 or 3 things. You need to write quite a lot so that your writing is good. You need, obviously, to make sure you know quite a lot, but most importantly, your personal brand is really important. This is true for publishing generally. The better known your name is and the more reach you have potentially with your own channels, whether that's Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever, or it's, a broadcast you might do, podcasting, blogs, articles commissioned for, people like Decanter or Wine Spectator. You need to be building up some form of capital basically in your brand. I mean, it's difficult, it can't be your day job. It doesn't pay enough. So you need to do it alongside being a sommelier or a merchant or an educator, whatever it is you do. But it is, I think, a hugely rewarding thing to write and then publish a book. One of the things that we look at is, because it is not a hugely commercial business, is looking for people to help support publication. That's always something to consider. If you're writing a book about something, how can you have publication supported? Can you get wine producers who, agree to buy a certain amount of copies up front. That's the kind of thing that really helps. I think you just need to be very commercial, and that's true about whether you want to go into publishing or you want to be a writer. The more you can show that that there is a market for your book and that you can help reach the audience, the more compelling that would be.
Yeah, that's very good advice, Hermione. I know from personal experience that actually the easiest thing in the whole process is probably writing the book. The hardest part is finding people who are willing to read it, and especially people who are willing to pay to read it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I was giving my father a copy of every book we published as I published them. And there became a point, and he loves reading about wine, but he really loves reading about history. And there came a point at which he said, don't give me any more for a bit. I've got more wine books than I have got time to read.
Well, that's a tough place to be if even your own father is kind of saying enough's enough.
He loves the books, but I was giving him everyone, and he only. I think he only wanted sort of 1 and 2. I mean, he loves Fiona Morrison's book, and he's a fan, but some of us read wine books every day of the week. Other people read fiction or history books or whatever. I'm sure you read history books sometimes. So you can't, as I said, you can't flood the market.
I think the day my mum tells me she doesn't want any more of my books will be the day I know I need to give up.
It's different if you're writing them. Of course, your mother has to read every book you've written, but I'm publishing. It's a bit different. I'm publishing quite a few books in a year, and I can't take that much credit for them. So, but he's definitely due another couple of books. He adored Andrew Jefford's Drinking with the Valkyries, if that's a good segue to reading something.
Yes,
like
absolutely. Then after that, you can perhaps tell us about your own writing aspirations.
Yes, we've just published this in paperback. We mostly don't publish in paperback. We keep our beautiful hardback editions going, except the Classic Wine Library, which are all published in paperback in their original version. This is such a beautiful book. He's such a philosophical and literary writer and man. And we wanted this book to appeal to a broader audience than people who just buy wine books. I'm going to read the first half of a short article that's entitled Liquid Rags in Your Mouth, 2013 Barbaresco, Produttore del Barbaresco. You remember Italy? If so, you probably remember ancient towers. Most weren't built to look beautiful. It's only the passage of centuries that has given them a patina of charm. Tuscany's San Gimignano bristles with 14, but once there were 72, an insanity of towers, a forest of clannish fingers stabbing the sky, their elevation very nearly as mysterious a project as the sculpting of East Island's Moai. Barbaresco has just one 12th century siege tower. It's there on the label of this wine. Ugly, jagged windows, nibbled crenellations, and a strange white square halfway up its side, though perfectly positioned at the prow of the village, commanding both the vineyards, which spread out immaculately on 3 sides, and the wooded slope that drops like an apron. It certainly belongs on the label of this wine, because if ever a wine gathered a place into itself, not just the topographical place, but the historical place too, it's this one. Barbaresco, as far as anyone knows, was one of the sources of Barolo in the days before precision of origin was considered significant. What would have mattered during those undocumented centuries in the Lang was the ability of a vineyard to ripen Nebbiolo rather than the other varieties of the place, Barbera, Dolcetto, Moscato. The dipping, unfurling vineyards around Barbaresco village had the warmth to do this. Did Barbaresco's wines, though, have a character of their own? One late 19th century author, Lorenzo Fantini, in his 1879 monographia, published in 1895, identified a point of difference between the Nebbiolo of Barbaresco and that of Barolo, a refinement of bouquet. If we know more today and are able to enjoy this wine as a Barbaresco benchmark, it is in part due to a contemporary of Fantini's called Domizio Cavazza. Cavazza witnessed catastrophe and salvation. A bright young Milanese and agricultural student, he won a scholarship to study in France. After a year in fruit and horticulture at Versailles, he went south to phylloxera-devastated Montpellier in 1879, where he worked under the great viticulturalist Pierre Viala and saw Planchon's work with grafted vines. He returned to Italy, as yet unaffected by phylloxera, in 1880. He was nominated to lead Alba's newly founded enological school the following year. He chose to live in Barbaresco, where he bought a property in 1886. In order to help create a separate reputation and identity for the village, he corralled 9 growers to found a pioneering cooperative, the Cantina Sociale di Barbaresco, in 1894. It lasted just 30 years. Cavazzo died young at just 57 in 1913. World War I drained the region of manpower. Phylloxera struck. And when Mussolini came to power in 1922, he told grape growers to switch to grain production. Its memory, though, lived on, and when a new crisis of depopulation again threatened the village in the 1950s, the lure of the Fiat, its priest, Fiorino Marengo, encouraged 19 local growers to form the Produttori. 3 vintages were made in the church basement. There are now 54 growers, bringing all of their Nebbiolo, and nothing else, from a total of 105 hectares to the cooperative. The great village sites are in here somewhere. Only 5% of the Produttori's intake comes from outside the village, and any wine that is not judged worthy of this cuvée, which accounts for half of total production, is declassified to Nebbiolo de Lang. In good years, around 30% of total production is made as individual cru wines, including Asili, Paget, Rabaget, and Montefico. There are other village benchmarks, notably the wine of Gaia, made in smaller quantities from 13 different sites, and Giacosa, but the wine of the Produttori competes very fairly for its price, a fraction of theirs.
Thanks, Hermione. That was great. So rich in history. And Andrew's someone I think we're going to hear from directly in a future episode. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with him. What about your own aspirations then? You studied English literature. You spent your career in publishing. Do you have any personal writing aspirations? And if so, what kind of book would you like to write?
No, I really don't. I know. As a marketing person, I'm a sales and marketing person by trade. I love the fact I'm now a publisher, so I get to make books as opposed to just sell them and market them. But I do get to write articles. I've just written an article, The Judgment of London, actually, thinking of Stephen's legacy, is happening at the London Wine Fair in a couple of weeks' time. And they asked me if I would write an article about what Stephen would have thought about it. So, that was 500 words, I think. I'm very happy writing small bits of journalism. I don't think I'm ever going to write. I would much rather study more wine. I'm very keen to do my level 4, my diploma. And I know that will involve a little bit of writing. I don't think that's not where my talents lie, Richard.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. What about reading for pleasure then, aside from the world of wine and marketing and publishing? What's on your bedside cabinet?
I read an enormous amount of fiction of all sorts. I have very Catholic tastes. I've just finished reading Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye, which was wonderful. It's sort of old crime. But I read all sorts, commercial fiction, more literary. As I get older, I'm trying to read more nonfiction because I know it's really good for my brain. But I do love a story more than anything.
Yeah, I do as well. But I think I found as I get older, I'm increasingly drawn to nonfiction and history. I just consider it sounds terrible, but a better use of my time. If my reading time is limited, then reading fiction seems almost like a guilty pleasure sometimes when I've got so many other demands. But certainly when I go on holiday or certainly when I travel, I like a good story. But at the moment, I've got a small book. It's an old book that my uncle shared with me when he visited recently called Odette, the story of a British agent.
Oh, that's so good. I've read it.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. And published in 1949. So it's one of these books that's got a really charming post-war style of writing. It's really endearing in that way.
Yes.
But the story is also incredibly compelling because she was just this normal housewife mother whose husband was away at war. She was plucked from obscurity. She'd grown up in France, so she spoke French, sent behind enemy lines, and then subsequently arrested and tortured by the Gestapo. And she somehow found this remarkable reserve of strength and courage and somehow survived the most appalling circumstances of her capture. So yeah, a bit gritty and a bit bleak in some ways, but also incredibly inspiring. Details of all the books we've discussed today will be listed in our show note. Finally, Hermione, what are your plans for the summer? Are you tasting wine? Are you travelling? What's next for you in a personal and or professional capacity?
Well, the last question is quite hard because apart from the level 4, I'm not sure what I'm immediately doing. I'm going to be doing a bit of judging. I've been asked to be on the jury for the UK Sommelier Association Awards in the summer, which I'm really looking forward to. Over the summer, I've got 2 weeks sailing on a beautiful big boat in Croatia with family and friends, where we will almost certainly be drinking, I hope, exclusively Croatian wine. We did a similar holiday a few years ago, and the wine was fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then professionally, I'm going out for the first time to Tech Som at the end of August in Dallas. James Tidwell, who's a master sommelier, is one of the organisers of Tech Som, and he's one of our editorial board for the Classic Wine Library. And quite a few of the authors will be out there giving masterclasses and talks. And then I'm going to go up to Napa and do some events with the Napa Valley Wine Academy, who are one of our great partners. I'm really looking forward to that. So we've got 2 books coming this autumn from Napa-based writers. Gus Zhu, who is a very young, he's the first Chinese MW. He's written a book on wine tasting called Behind the Glass, the Sensorial and Chemical Terroir of Wine Tasting. And then Kelli White, who's the Director of Education at Harlan and Meadowood, is publishing a fantastic new book on wine called Wine Confident. And then the autumn just gets very busy because for publishers, as for wine producers, the autumn is the busiest time of year pre-Christmas. So I shall be busy at that point.
Well, plenty to look forward to
Definitely.
by the sounds of it. I'm also in Croatia this summer, so we can perhaps exchange notes on
That would be
Croatian
great.
wine. I'm no expert, but I'm going to throw myself into the deep end.
You can drink well for not much money there.
Sounds perfect. Where can listeners follow you, and where can they purchase the Académie du Vin?
So come to our website, which is www.academieduvinlibrary.com. Sorry, it's a mouthful. You can find all of our books and you can read articles from our blog, Vinosity, on there. They are available on Amazon, although I'd much rather you came to my website than Amazon, and they're available in good bookshops everywhere. And then in terms of social, we're pretty busy on Instagram and LinkedIn. There are 2 main channels. I have put out some videos on TikTok, but wine talk is a thing. I'm not sure that many of our customers are necessarily glued to TikTok, but we thought we'd give it a try. I post personally on Instagram as well about some of the tastings I'm lucky enough to go to.
Great. Thank you so much, Hermione, for your time today. You've been extremely generous, and it's been really interesting to hear about the life of a publisher and also some fantastic tips for aspiring writers who are looking to get a foothold perhaps in the wine industry.
Thank you very much, Richard, for having me. It's been fun talking about it all with you this morning.
Good. And we'll see you in Verona
very
sometime
much
soon,
so,
I hope.
Yes, I'd love coming to Verona to see you guys. That would be fantastic.
Okay, great. Next month, we are hoping that our guest will be Andrew Jefford, who we've heard from already today, and we'll be talking about his book, Drinking with the Valkyries. So thanks for your company. Until next time, ciao. Thanks for joining the Italian Wine Podcast Book Club. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods.